In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos Scouting Report, brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. It is the CFL's Eastern Final edition of the Scouting Report, and as I have as many times as I could this year, and there's been so many occasions to choose from, I have brought in Marshall Ferguson from CFL on TSN to help me break down the matchup that it always should be, right, Marshall? Toronto versus Hamilton in the Eastern Final.
Yeah, I was actually amazed when Dave Naylor put out that, because, my historical context on going way, way, way back on this rivalry is not very deep. Like I think cautious enough to admit that I don't know what I don't know, and I certainly am new to all of this in the last 5-6 years of covering these teams, and I've enjoyed the hell out of these matchups. And it's funny, the colors on the uniform, it just looks different to me, even when I'm tracking the games, like in my game tracker where I have the black and gold next to the double blue, and like I see those things side by side, and there's something emotionally for me that just kind of kicks in with that. That's just like my heart rate goes up a little bit, and I'm really excited. But yeah, for it to be the first time since 2013 and only the second in the last 35 years, when Naylor put it that said, I was like, well, I know Winnipeg used to be in the East, but what the hell? Like, and I get it. Like Calvillo ran through this thing forever, so that took a big chunk of all the East Final appearances from one of the two teams that were in the mix. And when Hamilton has been good as of basically this decade for the first time in a while, really consistently. Once they got to Tim Hortons Field, Toronto has fallen on some hard times, even on the years where they've had to fight their way through to get there. It's been like Ottawa's factored in, then Ottawa had their success, and it's like, and you do the math on it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, yeah, this is like super rare to have this. And I've kind of been thinking like big picture, Ben, about it just to kick off the week, and it really does make week 15, which I was super excited for. I wrote about, I was, talking to all these radio shows throughout the day to hype it up and all. It makes that feel like a pebble in the ocean compared to what's at stake in this one.
Yeah, for sure. Everything's on the line. And we've talked about how often these teams have played this year, if, maybe not every Eastern Final, obviously, but this year it's been every other week. The Argos and Ticats seemingly are playing. I was wondering what your perspective is on that. JB and I couldn't really get a handle on that earlier in the week, because I know, like, for me personally, I think it's tough to play against any team twice. Because I think it's just tough to, in professional football, really any level of football, whether it's overconfidence or just, not being able to use the same stuff you used last time. It's tough to beat a team twice. Now, to beat a team 4 times, I don't know if it matters at this point. And JB was sort of saying, once you get to 5, it sort of neutralizes everything. There's no rule anymore. You sort of everyone's kind of starting from scratch. How do you feel about a 5th matchup here?
Yeah, I like what JB had to say there, because to me, it's kind of like, if you are, if you're used to traveling one town over to go see your grandparents or your family members, it's like, well, that, how that's going to feel, how that's going to go, you're going to make the trip. If you're going 2 towns over to see, maybe your uncle or your aunt that you don't see very much, then maybe you do that. Maybe if you're going 1 province over to go see a cousin, then maybe this is the equivalent of like, you're from the East Coast, you've never been past Quebec, and somebody from your family says, oh, you have a long lost sister that's actually in Vancouver, and you're like, oh, okay, I don't know how this is gonna, I have no idea what this is gonna look. It's so foreign to have teams play each other this much. I'll say this about your theory on playing a team twice. Like, when I was a player, I hated this. Like, as a fan and as an analyst, I love it. And I think the reason why I felt those two things, and I'm sure there are players who like it and those who don't, they might not hate it. For me, it was, yeah, that's fine. I can understand their personnel a little bit better, or I can understand their schemes a little bit better. I can trust my eyes a little bit more. But I always knew that every time that I thought I was understanding or learning something, they're being coached on the other side to change it up on me. Like, they're not going to leave things the exact same. So I was constantly second guessing myself when I would play a team back to back or see them within a couple of weeks, like, week 7 of the OUA season and then the first round of the playoffs or something like that. Because it's like, okay, I'm seeing this 2 shell and I think I have an understanding of what they like to run here, but I'm like, but they know that I think that I know what they're doing and they're knowing what I do. It's just, and for me, I always overthought it. So I didn't like the mental gymnastics of that. I liked hey, I haven't seen this team in maybe the entire season, or I haven't seen them in 2 months. They've had some injuries. We've had some injuries. We've changed some schemes. They've changed some stuff. Let's get after it. That's obviously not the case with these two teams. And I think the interesting thing from the media perspective on why I enjoy it is that you get to see, I kind of compare it to almost like wood carving, where if you play against a team once, you get to see a lot of the similar players, not all of the same players because of injuries and whatever, but you get to see a lot of the similar players on the field. And it's like, well, that chips away a little bit and you make some of the shape out of the wood. Twice, you start to see it really come to shape. 3 times, 4 times, now 5. And it's like, this thing is intricate. And it's like, I know that when Toronto wants to run a slant and go on the outside, that Jamal Roll is going to bite down. And then it's a question of whether or not Tunde Adeleke has the range to get over there. Well, he's shown that he has. Well, McLeod might see that, and if he flips his hips to the backside, well, Eric Rogers is back in the. It's like you can actually look at the specifics of this in a way that, as media members, we would not be able to do that in the preseason. We would just be like, hey, let's see what these teams look like and roll the ball out there and get after it. We've learned so much. By the time you reach the end of the season, John Behe, my old offensive coordinator, used to have this great saying that I think holds true in media as much as it does as a coach or a player. He would always say that playoff McMaster, when I was playing there, would beat the hell out of week 1 McMaster. Because he's like, the amount that you learn and develop, and even if you suffer injuries because of the trench warfare that is football, the amount you understand and learn about yourself throughout the season, you would just absolutely crush the week 1 version of yourself, because you would look back at week 1. Anytime you put film on from week 1 of even the Argos, you're like, what? They didn't even know what they were doing. Now it's refined. And I think that's why I enjoy seeing these teams play each other so much. But as I say, as a player, it almost gets to the point of being awkward, where you're lining up across from the same guy so much that you know so much about him and he knows so much about you that you're lining up, and you really have to use the sports psychology of, let's wipe out so much of what's happened previously. I just need to win the rep. Like, I need to win this little tiny piece of the war in order to be able to have success. But not a lot of guys can do that. And it's just, the mental fatigue starts to wear on you. I think a little bit of the mental hula hoop that you're kind of swinging around inside of, going, which direction is this guy going to go? Like, I've seen him do this 300 times different ways to me throughout the year.
Now, if I can throw in from a coaching perspective to add to your player perspective on that, I loved playing a team multiple times when I lost the first game.
Yes.
The second game as a coach, I love that, because there's no question about player motivation. There's going to be overconfidence often from the other side. And I think there's one time in 2014, I played a team twice and lost both times. But every other time, I think we were able to come on top the second time. But on the other side of things, I didn't like it nearly as much. There was always a concern about overconfidence, because it's not that, and I'm not saying there's a lack of motivation here. Like, this is a chance to go to the Grey Cup. There's nothing like that happening. It's professional football. However, when you have had success against anybody, against anything in any walk of life, in any discipline, it's very easy to sort of psychologically put yourself at, well, I've done this before. It will be fine. We're going to take care of business. And coming in on the other side, you've got a team full of passion that remembers, because you remember every loss on the football field. And it's not so much about motivation. It's more about, what extra gear, I guess, you were able to tap into for this. So as a coach, I'm scared about a matchup like this where Toronto has won 3 of 4. I worry a little bit about that. Again, not lack of focus or preparation. It's just there's something inside your head that tells you this is easier than it actually is. You remember it differently.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, Ben, because that to me is an unavoidable necessity of great coaching in these situations, is that it's not the fault of the players for feeling that way. That's how we are wired. Like, as you say, it doesn't matter if it's in your job, your home life, or otherwise. Like, if I put my son down to bed 3 nights in a row and it goes perfectly and there's not even the slightest little bit of hitch, like, I'm going to just start taking my foot off the gas pedal a little bit in terms of, I don't need to prep, right? I don't need to warm up that milk for him before he goes to bed. And I'm sure his soother's in his room, or like, I'm just going to be like, things have been great. And that's just human nature. And that's I think where coaching comes. I personally think it's impossible, regardless of what coaches say, to have a team that's 3-1 against another team come in as equally motivated, fired up. They can act like it. They can fire themselves up. They can rah speech in the tunnel. They can whatever. I actually think that all of those things a lot of the time they're external, right? They're on the periphery. They're you're trying to give off that to almost convince yourself of that. What really I think gives teams that have had success the opportunity to keep winning against a team is when you face that first little bite of adversity in the game. Like if Hamilton goes up 7-0, that's where all of a sudden all that ego and that external and that, hey, we'll be fine. And I'm trying to convince myself, now it's real. And like the teams that have success consistently are the ones where they've been doing the right thing all year long. It's gotten them to that point, and when they face adversity, they keep doing the right thing. Same with Winnipeg. If they go down early in this Western Final, I have great confidence that Winnipeg could go down by a touchdown or two and still come back and win. Why? Because they have that sort of resolve. And I guess the question is, does Toronto have that kind of resolve? And does Hamilton have the ability to hold a team off when they haven't been able to, including Toronto, even when it was down at Tim Hortons Field earlier in the year?
And I think where psychology can come into this, sort of on the flip side of it, is if Toronto is able to get out to an early lead. You mentioned Winnipeg being able to storm back because that's who they are and they've done this before. I wonder if Toronto is able to, let's say Toronto is able to get up 10-0 or something like that early on. I wonder how difficult it will be at that point for Hamilton because of how the last matchup went, and that is fresh in their minds.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is. I think that's the biggest question for me. Like I've been tasked with breaking down this matchup on CFL.ca throughout the week. And the thing I keep coming back to every time, like I tweeted out today that trying to figure out the Masoli McLeod Bethel Thompson matchup. And it's just a gif of a Rubik's Cube because every time that I think I have the answer and I'm like, oh, look over here, that'll be the difference. I'm like, oh, no, that's wrong. Because there's actually something else that's affecting that. Okay. It just keeps moving and moving and moving. And the thing I keep coming back to is like, if I were to give you kind of like a blind taste test of these numbers head to head without telling you which quarterbacks they were, which of these quarterbacks would you take? One of them, okay, quarterback one in the last 7-8 games is completing 67% of his passes. The other is completing 71%. One of them's average depth of target, QB1, that had the 67% completion rate. His average depth of target is 9.2. The other quarterback's is 12.33. So now you've got a quarterback with a deeper depth of target by 3.5 yards and a higher completion percentage. Quarterback two also, to go with those stats, has 40 more yards passing per game in the second half of the season. The touchdown to interception ratio for quarterback two is 4.5. The touchdown to interception ratio for quarterback one is 0.82. The winning percentage of the team that quarterback two was playing against in the second half of the year was .838. Winning percentage for quarterback one was .757 in the second half of the season. Like, this is where I'm going with all of this is there's a lot of lopsided stats that lean towards quarterback two, which you probably figured out by now, especially on the touchdown interception ratio. That's Jeremiah Masoli.
Right.
Like Masoli has all the advantages, all the statistical. You know what advantage and statistical thing he doesn't have? Week 15 at BMO Field. And that's where this is just such a crazy setup. It's like everything that Hamilton and Masoli have done in the second half of the year points to they're hot, they should win, they should go on to the Grey Cup and be able to challenge anybody that comes out of the West because they'll have the home field advantage. If they can't beat the Argos at BMO, then none of that stuff matters.
I can hear Kyle Mello yelling from his couch right now that a lot of Masoli's numbers came against the three teams that didn't make the playoffs. But but you're right, and it's so tough to break this one down without sort of putting asterisks next to whatever stat, because you can do it with McLeod Bethel Thompson too. You can look at some of those turnover numbers and say, well, let's look at each turnover individually, or let's look at where they were in the game. It's a mess, and so the odds makers have this as pretty much a pick 'em because I don't think anybody has any idea how this is going to go. I wouldn't be surprised by pretty much any result. I don't think anything could happen score-wise that would stun me in this game. I believe the Argos will win, but it wouldn't surprise me if Hamilton put together a great game and pulled it out. So, it's I can imagine you sitting there looking through the stats. I know what a lot of them look like, and it's a zoo. So
I spend all year wishing for more data points to help my analysis, and now I have so many data points with these two teams, and none of them make any sense. And I'm like, the hell are we doing? Like, how am I supposed to do my job predicting any of this, right, or talking my way through? And I think an honest analysis of these two teams, and specifically these two quarterbacks, is just to say they're really complicated. Like, and that's why I think this will be so much fun, is that it's not, I think the basic analysis for people sometimes is like, well, how many yards did he throw for? Or, oh, my guy had 2 touchdowns and your guy had 1 touchdown. But what this really comes down to is on every snap. And this is why I love quarterbacking. And I always say this when I'm on podcasts and whenever I chat with you and even in person, Ben, it's like, I love studying quarterbacks because they're incredibly complex beings, because they have a billion decisions to make on every single play. And there's 500 different ways to play quarterback. And each one of them is unique and fun and different. And I mean, sometimes they're not all fun. I watched Taylor Cornelius all year and that was not fun. But for the most part, everybody kind of carves out their own style and finds a way to ply their craft. And these guys, I think, they might not be the most set in stone versions of tendencies and depths of targets and all that, but I mean, they've created a pretty good idea for me going into this of what they are going to be about. And because they are so unique and so different at times, I don't even know how to explain Jeremiah Masoli. Like he'll gunsling it all over the place, but he'll also be super, super hyper conservative. He'll check it down underneath all over the place. He'll lean on the running game, and then out of nowhere, he'll use his legs. And then the next time he'll throw it right into your chest for an interception that you haven't seen in 3 months. And it's like, okay, how am I supposed to figure that out? McLeod Bethel-Thompson is like, he's got this gunslinger mentality, but his completion percentage on throws of 20 yards or more is not good. So it's like, well, can you have that and still have success? Well, yeah, it turns out you can, because on first down, you can be hyper efficient and complete everything on first down underneath, which actually is an extension of the run game, helps you get into healthy down and distances. And over the long course of the game, in the second half of the season, when he's been named the starter and Arbuckle got traded, you can be productive on offense doing it that way. And it's like, okay, but if I take Macbeth's style and I parse it against Masoli's style, who wins? And that's why I keep just saying, like, I have no damn clue at this point. I think it's going to be so much fun to see them try to figure it out on game day.
Yeah, and I think the last thing you said there for sure resonates with me. Don't you think this is going to be a fun game? Like I'm
so.
I'm as excited about this game as I have been about any all year, and it's not just because of what's on the line. That would do it in on its own, but aside from that, I feel like both of these teams are actually in a pretty good place right now. I think health-wise, they're both in a decent spot. It's pretty much as good as it's been all year, and they're both teams are. I'm scratching at the Edmonton game, but I think both teams are coming off of some good play. So yeah, I expect this to be pretty good, and there should be a pretty good atmosphere there at BMO Field. Now, I've got a quarterback question for you, because I want to know, looking at the Toronto Argonauts, over the last few games where Eric Rogers has been out, they moved Varys Daniels into the slot, and suddenly he was one of McLeod Bethel-Thompson's favorite targets. So it was, if it wasn't DeVaris Daniels, it was Curly Gittens Jr., who's a Z receiver, which in itself is amazing to have a favorite target that's out wide to the field side. And just looking at his stats, like 50 receptions, 600 yards for a Z is pretty awesome. But you look at those two guys that he sort of built a relationship with. Do you think that helps when now Eric Rogers is back? I assume Rogers is going to go back into the boundary slot. DeVaris is going to go back to X. Do you think that rapport that they spent time building, even though it was in the slot, is going to carry over now that DeVaris is back at X?
I'll say this about having a really super talented receiver like Eric Rogers come back into the lineup. It should all be positive, but it always makes me nervous, just because as an ex-quarterback, you have a tendency, whether you realize it or not, that when you break the huddle, again, this is the human nature stuff that we're talking about with the psychology that just gets ratcheted up in the playoffs to feel that much more intense. You break the huddle and you know what your read is, and you know what you would be doing subconsciously if it were not Eric Rogers standing over there. But there is that little half a second of a thought when you're breaking the huddle, walking to the line, where you're like, oh, damn, that'd be really nice to get Eric the ball in this play, right? And it's natural, because you're like, well, he's great. He's awesome at what he does, so I should look that way. Does that throw off your read? Does that ruin your progression? I guess that's the challenge. But I always believe, and again, this is just a feel thing. I don't have any stats for this, but I've always believed that when you have players that you develop the chemistry with that you're talking about in Daniels and Gittens, and then they have to bump back to these other spots, at some point in the game, McLeod Bethel-Thompson is going to make a sensational throw. It could be a fly and die to the wide side, the Curly Gittens, where it's just like he's not even out of his break when McLeod lets it go, and their timing is perfect, and boom, it's on his hands when he snaps his head around. It could be an in-breaking route in between linebackers, throwing between a window. where he hits Tavares and Eric is the decoy running a wheel route down the sideline or something like that. You'll see him make such a great throw in this game, and you'll be like, wow, that's a good one. And it's like, okay, well, why was that so good? Why was that so rhythmic and confident? It's because he has that chemistry that you're talking about. So I've always believed that when somebody comes back into the lineup that's a really talented receiver, it pulls your heartstrings a little bit on where you want to go with the ball. But there will be moments of kind of like the out of body, you know, whether you call it like the mental flow state or whatever it is, where you'll see McLeod make a fantastic throw to one of those two receivers, and he won't even realize how great it is because he's just in the flow of the game and making plays. But it'll always creep up on you, and you'll always feel a connection with those players that you've worked with most consistently.
And another thing I wanted to get your opinion on is the amount of time that Toronto has had off, and not so much the rest versus rust, but rather in the game planning side of it. Toronto hasn't played a meaningful game since that Tiger Cats game, and it will have been like almost a month for Toronto, because even their game against Edmonton was on a Tuesday, and so they've essentially already had like 2 straight bye weeks,
and they didn't play anybody.
Right, right, and so it's something where I feel like, from a Toronto perspective, it would have been nice if Hamilton had been forced to show a few more of their cards last week, because you could see they sort of called things off, not that early, but they didn't have to go down to the wire the full game showing everything they had. But there's going to be a lot less left in the vault than Toronto has working with, having not needed to show anything in a month.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for Toronto, the biggest challenge on this when it comes down to not overthinking things. And part of that for me comes down to some of these home run shots on offense, because you know this, Ben, from looking at them closely throughout the year, the majority of the successful shots they've had downfield have been schemed. Like they've been double moves, or they've been like, let's take a shot on it. And you get the sense that Dinwiddie, as the relatively recent, like the young coach who's the relatively recent quarterback, he really likes to still have his hand in the game, and I don't think it's an ego thing. I just think he feels like it's a strength of himself as a play caller to know when to go for that home run shot and how to take it, and what he sees, he trusts. And a lot of the time he's been right. But I feel like he does call these things where it's like, it's not, hey, we're going to run, 2 verts and I want you to read the safety and look them off and go. It's like, no, this is the wheel route. He's your vertical shot. I'm calling it because it's a special, twist on a concept we've been running, and I want you to hit him down the sideline. And for me, it's like, you get enough time off. When I was talking to again, my former offensive coordinator, John Behe, for a podcast last week, and we were going through the play sheet, the call sheet that we had for the Vanier Cup in 2011, and I didn't remember this at all. I was blown away by this. He said we had 25 plays on our play sheet. I was like, what? I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, we ran I don't even remember what the number was, but we ran something like 90 offensive plays, I think, in that game. And we had 25 plays on the band, and we didn't run out of plays and go over to the sideline whiteboard and go, oh my God, what should we make up? It was like, no, that's our 25 stuff. We feel really comfortable with it, and we'll call it as we need to. And it wasn't that our offense was dumb. It wasn't, we didn't have guys that were super intellectual and could figure out concepts and do things on the fly. It was just, we didn't want to overthink it. We were like, we know who we are. It's not going to impress anybody at the end of the game if we have 90 plays run and every single one of them is different and we lose the game. It's like, the point of this is to just win the game. So I think that there has to be a little bit of that checking at the door of, hey, we've got all this time, we've got all this film to watch, let's scheme up all this special stuff and see how much of it we can get to. No, just call the game. Just stay within yourself and know what has gotten you to this point. You're playing a home playoff game for a reason, that you've had success at home. You've had success this season being who you are. You don't have to dial up all this crazy stuff to get McLeod Bethel-Thompson to throw some touchdown passes. He's going to do that for you if you give him solid concepts that he can read through progressions, deal with the pressure of the Tiger Cats front four, and get the ball out of his hand. So that idea of overdoing it, I think, is the biggest question for me with the offense at the very least, because I don't think Chris Jones, I mean, he's been around the block. He's seen this stuff. He knows how to handle these long layups. I don't think the defense will be in question. And same with Mark Nelson. I mean, he's the thing I worry about for Mark Nelson is him looking down at the other offensive or special teams coordinator and Jeff Reinbold and being like, well, what the hell is he going to throw at us? Because Reinbold's always using crazy stuff, and he's usually using it against Toronto, or at the very least trying to use it against Toronto. So Nelson's got to be driving himself crazy just trying to predict what the special stuff's going to be from the Ticats special teams.
And I guarantee you there's going to be some sort of exotic punt block attempt given the trouble that Toronto has had. And they haven't had a lot recently, but just based on, the 6 or 7 games this year where somebody either got through or almost got through, I know for sure that's coming. So I'm sure Coach Nelson has been scheming all week to make sure everything is protected from every angle, even if it's, and you don't want to sacrifice coverage downfield. That's not, that's not a game you really want to get into against Hamilton. But you got to make sure that punt isn't blocked, and it's plays like that I think will be a real problem for the Argonauts. Like, to me, I everyone differs on this. My personal opinion is I believe Toronto is a better football team, and I don't think by much, but I do think they are. And so, from my point of view, they need to avoid things that neutralize that advantage. And so things that typically do that are penalties, turnovers, weather. Sometimes you can't really avoid that. But the turnovers and the penalties, we look at Hamilton's most recent game against Montreal. I'm not even sure Hamilton played that well. I couldn't even tell. Like, watching over that, I've done now 2 rewatches of that game since originally watching it. And every time I watch it, I'm not even really sure what Hamilton did in that game. And the stats are the weirdest thing ever because they just had so much, Montreal had so much penalty yardage, and they turned the ball over 5 times. And so Hamilton just didn't need to do a lot. So, I'm struggling there because to me, that's definitely the end of Toronto. If they turn the ball over the way Montreal did, if they commit penalties like Montreal did, they're done. That's it. But I don't know if Hamilton has enough ammo without those things because I haven't seen it recently.
Yeah, it's a totally fair criticism. Like, I was watching from the upper deck at Tim Hortons Field during this game, and the thing that jumped out to me was, obviously the vast majority of their scoring came in that second quarter, and it wasn't even really like this tide of emotion or momentum or any of those kind of intangibles that you want to talk about. It was just they got put into some pretty decent down and distances, whether it be by penalties or down, field position based off of flags or whatever, turnovers. And then they hit a couple plays. Like, they ran in that game something like 52, 53, I think, offensive plays. I think 5 of them probably earned them the win, which, again, is not unheard of. Like, it's always going to be a handful of plays that are going to help you get towards a victory, but it was the Brandon Banks touchdown, obviously, when they got the coverage that they wanted. Montreal didn't roll the backside half over. The free safety had to cover down, miscommunication in coverage. See you later, Patrick Levels, run a corner to the back of the end zone. Like, I'm sitting in the upper deck and I'm talking myself through that as I'm watching it. And I'm like, that's exactly the look that they wanted. Like, it's very obvious that was the look. Masoli read it perfectly. He made the right throw. And that's the difference in playoff football sometimes when you have teams that are closely matched up like Montreal and Hamilton. I think if William Stanback actually runs effectively in that game and the Ticats defense doesn't shut him down and Trevor doesn't have to throw the ball as many times as he did, because that was not their game plan. Like, that was not, they were lining up, Montreal was, not to get lost on last week, but they were lining up in so many sets that were balanced, right? It was Quan Bray and Reggie White to one side. It was Geno Lewis and Jake Winicki on the other side. And in the backfield, it was either Stanback and Spencer Moore, or Stanback and Christophe Normand, or Stanback and Cameron Artis-Payne, or Cameron Artis-Payne and Spencer Moore, or they were going running back, or running back, fullback, and they just wanted to be able to run the ball more effectively. And when they couldn't, it was like, okay, this game is just not going to go Montreal's way, because Trevor's not going to throw you out of this thing by just chucking it up in the snow into that talented secondary. And that's why I bring this up to say, when I'm looking at the margin of error, I think for Montreal, it was super, super thin. And the most critical part of that margin for error was, if you don't get William Stanback going, this is not going to unfold properly for you. When I look at Hamilton and Toronto and the way they match up, it's like, I'm with you. I think that Toronto actually has like the deeper talent on their roster as of right now going into this game. But I don't know if the margin for error is any bigger or smaller for Toronto, because Hamilton just plays them so tough outside of that week 15 game. But again, that's the conundrum of all of this, is like, well, week 15 is recent and not a whole lot is going to change, but the way that they run their stuff since week 15. And again, this is what I've been doing. This podcast is a great look inside my mind for the last 3-4 days, because it's just like yarn being attached to strings, and I'm trying to connect dots and be like, well, this makes sense. No, actually, no, it does. It's the same thing I talked about with the Rubik's Cube. It's like every time I start talking, I just start talking in circles, because it's like, yeah, but the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end of what the point I'm trying to make, because this is such a mixed bag. And I just, the one thing I can't get my mind off of is just how vertical and how aggressive Hamilton was throwing the ball in week 15. And I'm like, is that the plan just because that's the way they wanted to play Toronto? Or is the first quarter, first half even going to look significantly different in a playoff matchup because they're going to go more conservative? And what's the difference maker in that? And how did they come to the determination that they wanted to be so aggressive in week 15? And there's just a billion questions, and we don't have any answers going into this, and I don't even know if we will afterwards, to be honest.
And I would like to know, like postseason, I hope that we get an answer to that question, because I want to know if that was data gathering, because that's something that I love to do, like especially if I know I'm playing a team again later or a game doesn't matter, or sometimes even in a first quarter, I'm just going to throw a bunch of formations out there because I want to see, how do they respond? Okay, when we do this, we line up in bunch, we line up a bunch near, a bunch far, or what if we line up stacked? How do they respond to this? And if you got a whole game to do that, now I don't think that was the plan really, because Hamilton did want to win that game. It meant something, but there is something like if we can gather data and also try and win this game, much like how I think Montreal was trying to win the game against Ottawa but without actually playing anybody or risking anybody's health. And so like you're trying to do two things at once. It doesn't usually work out, but was that the plan? Was that data collection, or was that a strategy that they said, hey, when we think we're going to get zero, we're going to take a shot and see if we can connect with a home run. So I don't know, but I hope we get an answer to that.
I agree with you. And I think whatever questions we were going to ask about week 15 and where that came from, the follow-up question is going to be whatever the hell they do in this game. Because if it's the same, then you're asking a follow-up. And if it's completely different, you're asking a much different follow-up, but they all matter. Like they're all connected. And I heard Orlando Steinauer say it as his post-game press conference on Sunday after beating Montreal about the regular season, because that's kind of been my conspiracy theory as well. Has been, well, I think they were just trying to see how Toronto handled some stuff and maybe the personnel that they want to attack going forward, because it's tough to get a book on some of these guys like Deku and I'm trying to think who's number 12 on Toronto's defensive backfield.
Jamal Peters.
Right? Yeah, Jamal Peters. Like, I don't think there's a really well-rounded book on him as a player as of yet, even though he's been around for a little bit now. So I was like, well, maybe they're trying to figure that out. And then I'm with you. I'm like, they wanted to win that game, Marshall. I'm like, what are you talking about? They weren't just going to go out and chuck it and be like, hey, let's find out who's good at defending the deep ball. It's like there were bigger things at stake than just that. But then Orlando said in his post-game presser this past Sunday that the regular season is all about information gathering. It's data gathering season. It's not a regular season. It's data gathering. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And you put that in your post-game presser going into a playoff game against Toronto after what we saw you tried to do to Toronto in week 15. I'm like, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. Now I feel a little more comfortable saying that maybe they were trying to figure some stuff out late in the season.
It's funny how football is such a strange thing, because any game can, I know we've talked about on this podcast before how any game can come down to sort of 5 moments or 5 plays, but I think you can get even more in a tight game. You talked about the razor thin margin of error and stuff like that in the Montreal game. There can be one play call in a game like this, one decision, on this particular play, this setup. If this decision is made correctly, it's going to go Toronto's way. If it's made incorrectly, it's going to go Hamilton's way. I think you can even find that in the Hamilton-Montreal game. That 2nd and 3, Montreal's driving early in the game. Hamilton knows it's going to be a run. Montreal knows they're going to run, and they run this strange cross block on the left side as like a trap block that I know Jagarrett Davis was like in the backfield before Trevor Harris even knew what was happening, handed off the ball, and it was blown up immediately. And that to me was that might have been it. If Montreal scores a touchdown on that drive, how different does that game look? How does that turn out differently? And so in this game here, it could be one of those things. These teams are tight enough where there's a lot of pressure on these coaching staffs, because if you have one blown assignment, one bust in coverage, one poor play call, that may be it.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny to hear you mention that play because I thought the same thing where I'm like, that's just like Tony Washington not getting over and being able to make a play. I'm like, that's so frustrating. And then later in the game, this is the part that blew me away, Ben. And you know this because you watched it back too. They ran the same play and Jaguar did the same thing.
I know.
Like he short cornered it again, made the tackle for loss in the backfield, got up and celebrated, and then Stanback got up and looked at Jaguar Davis and started laughing, and they said something to each other. And I was thinking, you know what? I would bet my life savings, which is not very much because I worked in radio for 5 years, but I would bet my life savings that William Stanback got up, turned around to Jaguar and said, God damn, we got to stop running that play towards your side. Because like that's the tendencies that grow out through the game that you see developing in real time. And it's like, okay, so if I'm Montreal, my game plan was to go in there, play 2-by-2 balanced with a running back and a fullback. And even when we're not able to run the ball, now we're just going to announce that we're going 7-man protection and try to play a game of 5-on-4. It's like, well, I don't love that game plan. Right. And so you could very clearly see they were using more of that personnel, more of those formations than they had all year. That was their plan. You got to be better than that, man, in order to beat Hamilton in the snow. Like, I don't think that was how you were going to get it done. And you got to learn to evolve in game. I think Hamilton is going to have an offensive game plan where they're going to spread it out and chuck it all over the place and try to pop a couple of inside draw runs and things like that to Don Jackson. But I mean, they're going to need everybody all hands on deck. And Stephen Dunbar was not good in the game this past weekend. And I think Tim White is arguably their best receiver as of right now. Brandon Banks is scoring some touchdowns down the stretch, but I think Tim White's the best receiver on the field for the Ticats. But then it becomes a question of Chris Jones. Like, is he going to roll coverage to Tim White? No. Like, I don't think that that's going to be a simple X's and O's type of move for them. So, well, yeah, it'll be nice to see how it plays out and to finally get some answers. But man, there's a lot of moving pieces here.
When I was going to take a look through the Hamilton defense and I was trying to come up with how to attack it, well, a lot of my strategies have now gone out the window because I think now Seontae Evans is going to play and I was going to try and take advantage of all this movement in the secondary. But assuming that everyone's sort of in their base positions, if you've got Adeleke playing free safety, you've got one of the best linebackers in the league in Simone Lawrence at linebacker, and you've got Jaguar Davis playing the way he was last week. Not to mention that's a really strong defensive line across the board for Hamilton. But you've got star players at every level of the defense, and that to me is sort of scary because that starts limiting your options as to where to attack. And there's a game breaker at every level of the defense that can make you pay if you aren't smart with the football. So that is something that sort of concerns me. And we maybe don't have the same stars to that degree at every level in Toronto. It's an outstanding defense, and I think position for position they match up very well. But it's got to be just a big confidence thing for that whole Hamilton defense, knowing that your positional group, you can look over at a guy like Adeleke, and not to mention the boundary guys too in Brooks and Desmond has obviously been shutting it down on the boundary corner all year. So I just think there's a lot of faces there where if things aren't going well, they can look around and they know they've got Simone's going to be there for them, and Davis and Adeleke and all those guys are going to be there for them. That's got to be a huge confidence boost.
Yeah, the crazy thing is too, like they have that comfort level because they're guys that they trust that are next to them, but they're not even the people who are supposed to be there. Like that's supposed to be Delvin Breaux in the boundary playing with Brooks and Jaguar Davis and Simone Lawrence, and middle linebacker is supposed to be Larry Dean. Like if the COVID season actually happens in 2020, it's Delvin Breaux and Larry Dean and Rico Murray. Instead, it's Cameron Kelly, Santos Knox, and Desmond Lawrence. And yet they're still looking around and being like, yeah, you guys have been here all season. You've been pretty healthy all year, so we can still kind of ball out with you and trust it, which is crazy to think that they've evolved that quickly. That's probably a big credit to Mark Washington for what he's been able to do to keep that unit together. But in terms of attacking Hamilton's defense, I was kind of with you on the theory that you mentioned about going after, before we came on here, going after probably the free safety in Stavros Katsantonis, because I actually thought Montreal, based on the fact that it was last second or it was late before kickoff, they really tried to go at Tunde Adeleke when he was playing field half, and he had a game-high 10 tackles. And he gave up some catches in front, and he had to make some rally tackles and all the rest. But, I mean, that dude flies around and plays at a pretty high level. And I thought, well, man, if Tunde's in at half again and Stavros is the free, if I'm an offensive coordinator and I'm running this RPO system that Ryan Dinwiddie is, I'm going to be doing catch it in the gun, ride through the belly, pull a guard, make it look like it's this inside trap play, pull it, go to throw a slant to the field side, right? Try to beat Tunde on that. And if Stavros dives down, now it's like a second or a third level RPO where it's like I'm riding, I'm watching to see if my slant pops open, then I'm checking the free safety. If he takes a single step down, I got a sluggo on the backside. And I'm just going to go here to pop to reset my feet, and then the ball is gone. And it's like, so I started dreaming up ways that I could defeat that lineup. But then it's like, well, if Deontay Evans is in, does that change that? Probably. If Tunde's back at free safety, he's not as likely to randomly jump at eye candy that you're going to get in an RPO slant offense. That probably changed. So I agree. It does. It changes the way that I think that they will attack what Hamilton is offering up.
And it's funny, we were talking earlier this week on the podcast about a lot of those same concepts that you're talking about, ways to try and take advantage of that situation. Another one was Hamilton at midfield showed a tendency to want to roll coverage to get Delicate back into that free spot. They would sort of shift around. If you can anticipate rolling coverage, there are some fantastic things you can do to take advantage of that. And so that's one of those rolls of the dice where you think, okay, well, what if we hit some sort of quick hitter into the space that's being vacated by a Delicate as he rolls back to free to cover deep third or what have you, or have a slant from Eric Rogers coming across against that. There's so many exciting possibilities if you can gamble and you think you're going to see that. But again, we may not get to take a look at that because I kind of expect him at this point to be back at free safety. So I guess we'll never know.
McLeod does do a good job, I will say, though, of being able to diagnose stuff really quickly. And like when I talk about rolling with the punches in the middle of the game and figuring it out, like I don't think that he's afraid to have his voice heard on the sideline. Like, hey, here's the look that I'm getting. Please let me try to control this at the line of scrimmage, and let's talk to these guys and figure it out in the middle of the huddle, in the middle of the game. I think he's got that quality that you want at a quarterback. Because again, applying my own sensibilities to it, my last game ever in high school football, we were getting beat up by a team that we had crushed by 30 points in the regular season. Talk about playing teams twice back to back or close to each other, and we were getting beat in this city championship game, and my offensive coordinator came over to me and said, do you want to call the plays? Like, I was in high school, I'm a fifth year quarter. He's like, do you want to call the plays? He's like, because I can't figure out what you want right now, and you have a better sense for what's going to work because you're on the field. And I said no. And my whole football life, I've regretted it. Like, I think back to that moment and I'm like, oh man, I froze up and I said no. And it was like, that's been a lesson for me the rest of my football life, whether it be playing or not, where it's like, when somebody gives you the opportunity to have your voice heard and you feel very strongly about something, take advantage of that. Like, grab that and say, you know what? I am going to call my own plays. And McLeod's got that. And I apply, again, my sensibilities to that. And it's like, well, I wish I had that confidence that he gives off, even when he misses a throw and he flails his arms about and he squats down, he grabs his helmet and he freaks out and he starts yelling and pointing. And he's super emotive on the field. And it's like, I don't mind that, because a quarterback who's not comfortable in his own skin and doesn't trust himself to make the next throw would miss the throw and honestly do what at times Cody Fajardo does, which is like kind of angry, but like, I'm just going to go to the sideline and hopefully nobody notices me. And I don't want to cause a scene. So I'll try to stay out of the way. And, I'm really upset, but I'm not going to let anybody see that I'm upset. And it's like, Cody has that weird vibe where it's like, you're allowed to express yourself, man. Like, you're the starting quarterback for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. People will follow you. So lead them. And for me, McLeod is somebody who can be followed behind because he actually does give you that sense of that rock and that confidence. And again, to compare the two quarterbacks, Jeremiah has so much respect in that locker room in Hamilton because he's a long tenured guy, but also he's soft spoken. And once in a while, and we haven't seen it for a while, Ben, but once in a while, he'll just do something that's really badass that, for lack of a better term, makes all the kids in the room get really excited. Like, all the young first and second year guys are like, oh, snap, I saw this guy play at Oregon in like 2000 whatever, way back, and he's still out here balling and I'm on his team. I want to follow that guy because I know him and I trust him and I feel like he's the one that can help us get to a Grey Cup. So it's just another layer to the quarterback matchup where the intangible leadership stuff, I think, will play into this one. And I guess it's whichever quarterback leads the best that gives his team the chance to win.
First of all, a quick shout out to Coach Doyle, your former coach, Frontenac Falcons, because I think they just won
They
an
did
OFSA championship.
Yeah, they beat Centennial 37-7 this past week. So very excited.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think he's a great guy and a great coach. That was my very first OFSA win was over Coach Doyle, and that was an extremely well coached team. So
Nice.
I was always impressed with what he put out there, and it was one of my favorite wins because it really felt like we achieved something. And that was a team we had 10 guys that ended up playing U Sports the next year.
Nice.
From that team. It was a stacked team, and they gave us everything we could handle. It was just such a disciplined, intelligent football game, and man, it was one of my favorites of all time. So I always try to keep track of what Frontenac does because they're fun to watch. It's good football.
Yeah,
Now,
that's awesome. My offensive coordinator, Mark McGee, actually texted me after they won off this week, and he said, "Hey, do you want the film login? Can you review? Can you let me know what you think of what we're doing here?" I'm like, "Hey, man, whatever you guys are doing, just keep doing it. I can't help you. You're winning stuff." So.
And then the other thing, talking about McLeod, I think that's the biggest transformation he has made since the criticism he was getting going back sort of, to that 2019, prior to that. The book on him was he was always taking too long to figure out what was happening downfield. And so he was taking a lot of sacks. He was making bad throws. He was waiting in the pocket. To me, the light sort of clicked at the end of the 2019 season. One of my favorite games to go back and watch from 2019 is the last time they played Montreal. In Montreal, Toronto lost the game. It was sort of the emergence of Chandler Worthy, and McLeod Bethel Thompson endured, I believe, 11 defensive back blitzes in that game. Oof. They had heat coming from all over the place, and he struggled in the first quarter. And then after that, he started to recognize things really quickly. And that was the first time I really saw that light go on for McLeod Bethel Thompson. And since then, his diagnosis to me has been far more quick, but also more accurate. And so that's something that he suddenly is really good at. You talk about diagnosing a defense. If you told me a few years ago that was a skill that he brought to the table, I would have doubted you. And yet here we are. I think he's great at it. And I think he's done a wonderful job adjusting to a very different system too, one that requires him to, have these RPOs and make some different reads than what he's been asked to do in the past. But he's such an intelligent guy, and so you knew eventually it would click for him, and I do believe it has. So that's the coverage, the disguising stuff. I'm not too worried about that from an Argos perspective, but it's going to be a fun part of the game to watch as well.
Well, sometimes with him, he's so smart that he diagnoses it, and then he just doesn't execute the throw. Like there's been times this year where guys have been like I think Curly Gittens Jr. at one point late in the season down onto the field side going away from the lake towards the GO train station there at Exhibition ran a little double and he just missed him by like a huge amount. And I was like, what the hell is that? Like you do all the hard stuff, like do the easy thing, make the throw. Like it's coming out of your hand, it's spinning, put it where you want it. It's not that hard. So I love talking to McLeod Bethel Thompson because he is such an intellectual and so much fun to pick his brain. And the first thing he said to me in an interview this year on a sit down for the CFL on TSN was I was like, how are you seeing the game? Like, how has it changed for you? And he gave me this analogy where he said, like, football is triangles. And he said, so everything is, the Sam linebacker moves and the halfback tilts and the free safety comes down. And he's like, they're all attached via string. And these triangles are always tilting and shifting. And he said, before I would just look at the triangle of where I was trying to throw the football. And that was all I understood was like, those three players, and I was trying to understand where they were going and how they were getting there and how it would affect my routes being open. He said, now I see the triangle and I'm starting to understand how it affects the rest of the play. So I'm looking at that triangle of those three players that I'm kind of reading out, but I'm like, well, now I get that if that triangle looks a certain way, well, I'm probably going to get pressure on my backside. So I should probably get rid of this ball. And I thought that was a real interesting look into the mind of a guy who's seeing it in the first person and honestly learning right in front of us. And you don't get to see that very often, like, because a lot of quarterbacks don't, this goes back to a larger conversation that's probably more of an off-season thing, but quarterbacks don't get given the chance to learn, because quarterbacks that come in fresh to the CFL usually suck. like they can't figure it out. It takes a little while. It's why I kept campaigning this year for Caleb Evans in Ottawa, where I'm like, just keep letting him play. Like, even if he sucks, keep letting him play. You will be rewarded for it down the road if you just keep letting him play. It's not that Toronto didn't have other options than McLeod. It's that he just didn't go away. Like, he just, lingered and was backup, and then he was starting, and, he throws all these picks. Well, now he's just a late game guy. Well, now he's just compiling. Well, now Okay, yeah, but he's been around like long enough for you to have an opinion about him. And because he's been around long enough, I think he's just learned and he's just accrued knowledge over time and through reps and through practices. And I think not that he's been blow the doors off MOP favorite great this year, but he's been a better version of himself this season. And that's why they're hosting this game, I genuinely believe.
Marshall, we have gone on forever as we always do. This is, I think, set a record for certainly for an X's and Argos scouting report episode, but I think for all X's and Argos podcasts. So, congratulations on setting the record.
Thank you.
I knew it would be with you, but
I was just trying to bump your Spotify Wrapped so that if anybody was listening to you, that it would be the maximum number of minutes.
Yeah, I think it might just be my dad that has X's and Argos as their Spotify Wrap, but I appreciate you and your effort on that. Marshall, before you go, tell us about some of the stuff you're working on, and some of the events that we got coming up. There's all sorts of excitement, whether it's on the CFL page, whether it's stuff you're doing on the pod. What do we have to look forward to?
Sometimes I just laugh because I'm like, how in the hell did I get here where things are this busy every single year down the stretch? But I always enjoy this 3-week sprint. It's a little crazy. We were joking before I came on because you said, yeah, I'm just pouring a beer here. And I said, I got to make a quick tea. And you're like, what? Why are you having tea? I said, man, no energy wasted because it's stupid, honestly. And even then, like, I still ask for forgiveness and flexibility from the CFL.ca staff because I'm submitting articles like 2 days later than they're supposed to be on our deliverables chart and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, so I'm doing the CFL.ca playoff coverage, which basically involves shooting some videos, post-game recaps, redtag.ca aerial report. We're doing quarterback write-ups. We're doing analysis pieces. We're doing pre-game videos, going to BMO Field on Friday to shoot that one with Chris O'Leary, which should be a lot of fun because I haven't worked with Chris in a long time. And then in terms of CFP, we're just pumping out lots of content. Connor O'Neill and Wade Zinketta doing a great job promoting the Vanier Cup and U Sports football. I've got some special podcasts coming up in the final week of the regular season through Grey Cup, which I'm looking forward to putting out there. And I also just found out 2 days ago that I am going to be co-hosting Grey Cup Saturday on TSN for 6 hours, which is great because I've never done a studio show. And they were like, here, want 6 hours to talk football? I was like, cool, let's do it. So hopefully this is my audition tape to show them how much time I can fill if they need to in order to break down the Grey Cup. But that's going to be a tremendous opportunity. And then on Grey Cup Sunday, you are invited, Ben, if you can make it, along with anybody else who is listening to us right now. We have a great Grey Cup tailgate party going on. It's at Merritt Brewing in downtown Hamilton from 1 to 3 p.m. on Grey Cup Sunday. Free, no cover, none of that stuff. Any money you spend will just be on beer and having a good time. We got trivia. We're going to do some CFP swag giveaways. All that good stuff. We're just trying to create an event that people want to come and hang out. The game's going to be broadcast at Merritt Brewing that night on a projector screen inside the brewery. It's got room for about 75 to 100 people based on the restrictions that they have in place right now. Double vaccinated, masked, all that good stuff. But we're hoping that we can fill that up with 75 to 100 people consistently for a couple of hours. I'll be there as of noon on that day, recording podcasts and hanging out and having some beers and enjoying Grey Cup Sunday the way that we should after a long year of grinding away and talking about the game. It's a nice place to be able to get together with friends. So yeah, podcasts, written stuff, throwing a party at the end of it all, and then hopefully we have a hell of a game coming up a week from Sunday.
There is not a busier man on the planet right now, Marshall, but it's all good stuff. It's all Canadian football, so you can't complain. Marshall, thanks so much. It's been amazing having you all year. Thanks for every stop you've made with us. It's been continuous because there's been so much Toronto, Hamilton action this year, but I appreciate you being on with us every single time.
No, thank you, Ben. I appreciate it. And I know I say this every time I come on, but it's great that you've been able to build this up and the listenership and all the rest, because it's such a meaningful market to the Canadian Football League. I don't give a damn what people say about attendance numbers and all the rest. And having you be a consistent part of their understanding, I think, of Toronto Argonauts football. There's some people that want to, wave the pom-poms and celebrate, and there's some people who want to strictly educate. And I think that you do a great job of both, man. So thank you for having me. It's always fun to come and hang out.
Thanks, Marshall. Well, that will just about do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos Scouting Report. For Marshall Ferguson, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe.